Girls, here we are. Good morning. Oh, you're welcome to be back. That's nice. Usually you're all so quiet. All right, well, here we are, Matthew 17, ready to roll. So, are you girls, are they done out there? Okay. So for a while now, God has been teaching me about trusting him in all circumstances. And interestingly, he decided to use my dog, Colby, as his object lesson for teaching me this. And if you're not a dog person, forgive me for a few minutes. Just bear with me while I share with you a little bit about my dog and what God has taught me. Oh, and Chris, here we go. Let the games begin, bro. It's not working. Let's see. Does it work? Nothing. I love that. Okay, well anyway, it'll come on in a second. So you may have remembered I talked about my dog once before. I talked to you about how when I ask him a question, he looks at me and he turns his head and he looks at me. Almost like when God calls my name and I'm like, yeah, you want to go somewhere? You want to do something? Like he's so attentive to everything I say. And I love that about my dog. But I also have found that recently when the Lord has been trying to get my attention about trusting him, he used my dog. There we go. Living by faith. That's the name of the, thank you, Chris. He's the greatest. Yay, Chris, you're the best. I keep telling you this, there will not be technology in heaven. I'm just telling you it's not going to happen. At least my heaven is not going to have technology. Anyhow, so this is my dog, Colby. Can you see him? He's really cute. He's so cute. He's a little Havanese. He's my fuzzy buddy. And I like to take Colby with me during the day if ever possible, like if I'm going to a dog-friendly store. And there are dog-friendly stores. Home Goods, Hobby Lobby, Home Depot, they all, will take dogs and let you come in. And so this is me taking the dog to home. I love taking the dog places. And that's our daughter, Rebecca, and we're at Marsh Creek. And he goes paddle boarding with us, and he rides in the canoes and kayaks, and then he's on the paddle board up there with our daughter. It's a little bit far away, but you can kind of get the idea. So I take him places, and then my favorite place to take him is Rita's, because Rita's gives free custard and a dog bone. So he really likes to go there. So that's kind of a fun place we go to. Now you would think after 5 years of traveling around with me and all the fun places we've gone and all the things we've done, that the dog would think, she's trustworthy, right? She's going to take care of me. She's going to protect me. She's going to make sure I'm safe. Yet every time I take the dog and we get in the car, this happens. This is a video of my dog, and this is what he does. All right, Chris, what do I have to do? What did you just say? Hit the space bar. Oh. No. Was it going? Oh. Okay, here he goes. Do you want to go with me? I'm not sure. What do you want to do? You want to go? Come on, let's go. And this goes on. And he goes in and out and in and out. And I'm like, bud, I gotta go. You coming or not? And he's like, all right. And finally he'll sit down and let me pick him up, and I put him in the car. And then he has a freak out session. He whines and cries and carries on until we get to wherever we're going. He shakes. It's crazy. I feel so bad. I'm like, and I keep talking to him. I'm like, buddy, it's gonna be all right. We're just gonna go pick up Ethan at school, or we're going to Home Goods. It's gonna be great. You're gonna get in the car. We're gonna take a little ride. We'll stop at Rita's on the way home. This is what happens. Your kids go to college and you're like, you start talking to your dog. I'm just warning you. It's what happens because you don't have kids in the house anymore. So you start talking to your dog. Anyway, so I'm in the car one day and I'm driving, and God's been honing in on this. Are you going to trust me? Are you going to trust me? And we're driving, and all of a sudden the Lord speaks to my heart as I'm listening to the dog freak out and whine in the back seat. And I hear the Lord say to me, you're not really all that different than Colby. Except you and I have traveled a lot longer than you and Colby. And yet sometimes you don't trust me either. You are panicked and anxious and whining, especially when you don't know where we're going. You don't seem to trust that I'll be with you and that I'll watch over you. I've never left you or abandoned you. I've never stopped caring for you or providing for you. When will you believe that I will always love you and have your best interests in mind? I desire to give you good things and see you prosper, yet you seem to lack confidence in me. And as I looked into the back seat of my rearview mirror, and I looked there at the dog having a full-blown freak-out session, I saw myself in his little doggy eyes. See, God wants me living like this. This is on the way home usually. He puts his head out the window and he's all happy guy. He wants me living carefree. And he wants me living the great adventure with my confidence in him. And since he's driving, I'm free to stick my head out the window and let the wind blow in my face. And when we arrive at our destination, I can trust that he has a purpose and a plan for where we are going and what we're going to do together there. He's never left me nor forsaken me, so I don't have to fear. Dr. Bill Bright, who's the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ, also known as Cru, is an organization which has led millions and millions of people to put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, once said this, and it's on your handout at the top of the page: to walk in the Spirit, you must live according to God's promise, trusting in the integrity of God himself. Faith must have an object, and the object of your faith is God, made known through his word. God has proven himself to be worthy of your trust. There are thousands of promises for you contained in God's word, and no Christian has ever found any one of them to be untrue. When God says something, you can stake your life on it. Hopefully you picked up a stake on the way in, a plant stake on your way, and we're going to come back to this. You can know that he will never fail you. And if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, Stacy challenged us to answer the question, is God enough? Right? And then Marie piggybacked on that and said, is God enough for me? Well, depending on how you answer those two questions, if you in fact answer them in the affirmative, saying, yes, he is enough and he's enough for me, then the next question we have to ask ourselves is, am I living by faith? If I really believe those two things. And as we examine Matthew 17, we will see what it takes to live by faith. There will be instructions and examples, but most importantly, we will see Jesus' attributes shine forth in this passage today. And he's going to demonstrate why he is so worthy of our trust and confidence. And we will recognize once again that he is always enough. Let's open up in prayer. Lord, I praise you for my little buddy Colby. I thank you that you chose to use something so simple to be so powerful for me. And every time I take him, I'm reminded that I'm not so different than him. And Lord, I think probably if we ask many of the ladies that are here, that resonates with a lot of us. That all of us from time to time look at circumstances and say, I know you're enough, right? But man, I'm having a hard time living by faith right now. So God, I pray that you would now take this text and you would apply it directly onto our hearts, like a transparency or an overlay, God. Take the chapter and just place it as only you can, God, not me. You can place that right over where they are and speak, Lord. Let your word come forth powerfully and mighty, God, for it is what changes us. And we'll be careful to praise you and magnify you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're going to back up just 2 verses and go to Matthew 16, and we're going to read 16, 27, and 28. I'm going to use that kind of as the diving board into 17, because in most of the other gospel accounts, these verses are in that same description of the transfiguration. So I just want to back up for just a minute and go to 16, 27 and 28. For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with the angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. But these 2 verses contain prophecy. The first one, found in verse 27, concerns Jesus' second coming and what will happen when he appears. The second verse, verse 28, predicts what's about to happen on Mount Hermon. All right, so now let's keep going. We're going to jump now into 17 and see how this second prophecy is actually fulfilled right now on Mount Hermon. So let's go. We're going to go 17, 1-4. Now, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them. And then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. All right, so here we see the men go up on the mountain with Jesus, Peter, James, and John, and they go up on the mountain, and Jesus is transfigured before them. Now, in the homework, we had to examine how the other Gospels describe this account, just kind of give you a fuller picture. And if you did that homework, bear with me because I'm about to repeat it, but you would have read that Mark described it this way. His clothes became shining, exceedingly white like snow, such as no launderer on earth could ever whiten them. And Luke describes it this way. The appearance of his face was altered. His robe became white and glistening. Now remember, Jesus has just said in 16, right, we just read this, that some of them standing there were not going to see death until the Son of Man comes. And this statement led me to consider something for a minute. So what else? What other ways was Jesus described? Because they're saying it's going to till he comes in his kingdom, right? That's not in that moment where they're just on the mountain. That's not the moment he's talking about. Let's go to Revelation, and you can just listen if you want. But Revelation 1:13-15 gives this description of what it will look like. And in the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice the sound of many waters. And yet Revelation goes on a little further to give us a little bit more description. And this is probably one of my all-time things I'm looking forward to in heaven, especially this time of year. Revelation 21:23 tells us that Jesus shines so brightly in heaven, we don't need what? The sun. No sun. No sun needed, because it's bright all the time. All the time. No darkness, no winter, no blah, right? It's just, think of it like the nicest day around here, right? And you're like, oh, like yesterday afternoon, it was a cold day, but it was sunny, right? You're like, think of that. That's going to be what it's like when we get to heaven. I don't know about you. Maybe you don't like sun, but I love sun. And I'm like, and we're not going to get burnt. Isn't that going to be great? We don't even sunscreen. It's going to be awesome. Anyway, so all of that is a description. And if you put all of those descriptions together, you take the ones from the Gospels and you take Revelation, it's my opinion that what the disciples were seeing was a glimpse of what Christ's glorified body is going to look like. Tell me that's not cool. Is it any wonder Peter was like, hey, let's stay here? Yeah, I'm with you, Peter. Let's stay there. The glorified body of God. It's like a sneak preview to a movie. You ever go to like the first showing of a movie? I usually don't get to those, but if you ever do that, you're like, oh, look at that. It's like a sneak preview. They got to see a preview of what Jesus is going to look like in glory. I don't know about you. That was pretty cool. And if that's not enough, the disciples then see 2 men standing there who we're told are Moses and Elijah. I found an artist's rendition of what this looks like. And I don't know, it's kind of really hard to type. It's really bright, clearly. So this is the artist's rendition of what this looked like. And I have to wonder, the guys look a little like, as my kids would say, they're chilling, right? They're kind of chilling in that moment. I'd be like, huh? So maybe they just woke up, but I wanted you to see what it looks like in that moment where they're seeing that bright, shining light and 2 men standing there. But I have a question. How did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Was like Moses like holding like 10 commandments and Elijah's like having some locust and honey? Like what is going on? How did they know that? They'd never seen them before. And yet somehow they knew that it was Moses and Elijah. I don't know, but somehow they knew. And then I love this. They're eavesdropping on Jesus' conversation with these men. They're like, oh yeah, what are you guys talking about? And let's hear. Luke gives us the what they heard. He gives us further description. Luke 9:30-32 says, this is what they heard. And behold, 2 men talked with him who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which was about to be accomplished at Jerusalem. But Peter and those who were with him, heavy with sleep, when they fully awoke, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with them. So 3 men are discussing 2 men and God were discussing his impending death. Of all the people who could show up on Mount Hermon to have a discussion with Jesus, Why was Moses and Elijah chosen? Did you ever consider that for a minute? No? Okay. All right. Well, I did. And what I came up with after doing some digging is that Moses was a really significant person to the Jews. He represents the law. He had the law, right? He was given the law by God. And he's also, in Deuteronomy 18:18, he predicts that the Messiah is going to come. So he's a really important central figure to the Jews, but so is Elijah. Elijah has significance because he's the forerunner to Jesus as well as a prophet. So together they could represent the law and the prophets. Who is Jesus? He is the fulfillment of both. So perhaps that's why these two show up. But if you also consider that they were discussing his impending death, I also wondered a couple of things. And I started to think about these two men. Moses and Elijah were both rejected by the Jews in their ministry. Interesting. And so was Jesus. Both had very interesting deaths, if you consider this. Elijah was just taken up into heaven. Moses, no one knows what happened to him. He just got, I don't know. I don't know if he's actually buried. Nobody seems to know what happened. He died, but we don't know. But both may show up again in the end times, and so is Jesus. So interesting, because Revelation 11 speaks of two witnesses who have the power to stop rain and turn blood into water. Who does that remind you of? Who stopped the rain? Elijah. Who turned water into blood? Moses. Interesting. It's my opinion, take it for what it is, that maybe these are the two witnesses representing that are represented in Revelation 11. These are the two, in my opinion. It's just a thought, something to chew on. But back to our story. Why Moses and Elijah? They're talking together. We don't know exactly why those two, but this is kind of what they're discussing. They're talking about his death. Maybe they're talking about the future. I don't know. It doesn't give us too much detail, just that it's talking about his death. Maybe they were there to encourage him. I don't know. But they're talking, and all of a sudden, Peter speaks up. And he comments how great it is to be there together. And maybe they should make some shelters and hang out. And I like Peter. I got to tell you, people give him a hard time. They say, he puts his foot in his mouth and all that kind of thing. As I said to you earlier, if I were him and that was happening in front of me, I wouldn't want to leave either. I'd be like, yeah, let's stay. Let's camp. Let's hang out, right? And I'm not a camper. And I'd be like, yeah, let's camp. Let's make some shelters. Because in that moment, it's like, wow, look at this. This is unbelievable. What a moment in time. So let's keep going. Let's see what happens next. So we're in 5. We're going to go 17, 5 to 8. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Arise, do not be afraid." And they had lifted up their eyes. They saw no one but Jesus only. If you don't take anything else out of here today, nothing but this sentence, take this verse and stick it on anything that's happening in your life today and say to yourself, I see no one but Jesus only. If that's the only thing you take today home with you, those are powerful words. Those are transforming words. The glory of God descends upon them like a cloud, as seen when Moses meets with the Lord in Exodus 33:9. And God's voice announces once again that Jesus is his Son in whom he is well pleased. I don't know about you, but I want to hear that. I'm not going to be God's son. I'm going to be his daughter, right? I'm going to be a child of the King. But I want to hear him say, I'm well pleased with you. When I leave this earth, that's my goal. I'm pleased with you. I didn't do it perfect. I didn't do it awesome. I just want you to be pleased with me in the end. I want to hear that from my Heavenly Father when I get there. But they're so terrified when God speaks that they fall on their faces. But notice what Jesus did. He touched them and he spoke words of comfort and said to them, "Arise and do not be afraid." They saw no one but Jesus only. If I'm really honest with you this morning, fear is the reason I fail to walk by faith. Fear and fear alone is the reason I fail at this. When my eyes see certain circumstances, my brain goes into overdrive, and I can come up with every possible conceivable way that things are going to go downhill. I can give you Any amount, how many do you want? I can give you enough scenarios to fill a file of what I think is going to happen, and I'm pretty convinced it is going to happen. And my eyes are on my circumstances. Can anyone relate? I feel like it's very quiet in here. Am I by myself? No? Okay, thank you. I feel a little better. What if the next time we were really afraid, we would listen to him speak, right? Because they were afraid, they fell on their faces. What if we listened, if we didn't talk? That's my biggest problem. Don't talk, just silent. If I listened and then said, my eyes are on you. I see no one but Jesus only. I don't see the circumstances. I don't see the harsh difficulty. I don't see the disease. I don't see the what ifs. I don't look at the insurmountable odds. I see no one but Jesus only. See, when we fix our eyes on him, everything else fades into the distance. This is an example for us of how to live by faith. When we remember that Jesus can do the inconceivable, I want you for a minute to think about whatever it is that seems insurmountable, the thing that's got you by fear, right? It's captured. You're captured in fear right now. I want you to say to yourself, God can do the inconceivable, and I can trust him. Your handout sort of captures this idea, and it kind of gives it to you in chunks. It says, see no one but Jesus. Jesus is enough. Why? I can live by faith because Jesus is enough. He can do the inconceivable. He can do the inconceivable. If he can rip off his flesh, right, and show, he can go from the Son of Man to the Son of God, right, God incarnate. If he can rip that back and show you that, how can we sit there and go, like Colby in the back seat and go, I don't know where we're going. I'm a terrified mess. Oh my gosh, I'm like going to have an ulcer. What? Why? Because we can't trust the man that can show us more glory than we can ever conceive. I'm not saying this is easy. Trust me, I look more like Colby than what I'm describing to you right now. But I do believe it is possible. Let's keep going. We're going to take a look now at Matthew 17, and we're going to jump into 9. Now, when they came down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, why then did the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And Jesus answered and said to them, indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has already come, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands. And then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. Okay, so they're on their way back down the mountain, and Peter, James, and John are told not to tell anybody what they just saw until Jesus is risen from the dead. All right, I don't know about you, but my next question would be the whole raising from the dead thing. I'd be asking questions about that. They don't ask about that. They ask about Elijah. They don't ask about what they just saw, ripping off his skin and showing him the inside. No, we don't talk about, we want to know about Elijah. And I got to give him some grace, because basically in Malachi 4:5, they would have been familiar with this prophecy, which says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. This is the key to understanding this verse. They were probably wondering, well, wait a minute, we just saw Elijah, but you came before Elijah. So things seem out of order, right? They were like, what's going on? But what Jesus is telling them is, yes, Elijah will come first, but when? According to this prophecy from Malachi, before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That is not where they are in time right now. Where they are in time right now is Jesus' first advent, not his second. This prophecy is the second one, that when Jesus will arrive, not the first. So they're confused. That Revelation 11, when I was telling you about the two men, what I believe to be Moses and Elijah, that's the great and terrible day of the Lord that they're talking about, not that moment. And so Jesus assures them that John the Baptist indeed will come, which is the other reason why I believe one of those men is John the Baptist. He will be the forerunner. But in the meantime, I said John the Baptist, I meant Elijah, that Elijah will be one of those two men. But in the meantime, John the Baptist has come as a forerunner to Jesus in the first advent of his arrival on earth. Does that make sense? Good, you're nodding your head, you're with me. Okay, cool, I don't have to belabor that point. All right, let's keep going. 17:14 to 17. And then when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him kneeling down and saying to him, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. I want to go real fast. I know we did this in the homework, but for those who didn't do the homework, I think it gives us a bigger picture. I'm going to take you over to Mark 9, 19 through 29 real quickly, and I want to read to you because there's a piece in here you just can't miss. It's so great. This is Mark's account, and he said, he answered him and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. And then they brought him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell to the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And often he has thrown himself both into the fire and into the water to destroy himself. But if you can do anything, love that, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out with tears and said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw the people came running together, and he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. And then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And so he said to them, this kind can only come out by prayer and fasting. That's why I took you there. The Father is a key piece of this story that Matthew leaves out. And I want to focus on him for just a moment. Do you see what he says in verse 24 that I just read you? I believe, help my unbelief. The dad cried out that statement with tears. He was so genuinely desperate for God that he pleaded with deep emotion. Can I ask all of us, myself included, when was the last time we had a desperate pleading with God to help our unbelief? Not a desperate plead, fix my problem. Help my unbelief. With tears, he said, help my unbelief. I believe, but I want to believe more. I want to trust you more, right? Do we live that way? I know just the other night, I'm laying in bed, and I'm saying to myself, it was very, very early in the morning, and I woke and I was saying, Lord, I'm so desperate for you to change this one set of circumstances. The ache of my heart, Lord. I'm telling him the ache of my heart, but I'm not saying, help my unbelief. Help my unbelief. Help me to trust you more. I'll tell you the outcome of that. The Lord reminded me of something later that after I had that encounter in the night, the Lord pointed something to me, and I'm going to share that with you at the end. But when was the last time that we said, I don't want any more doubt, Lord. I don't want any more doubt. Teach me to trust you. And here it is. It's in this place of humility and surrender that we ask God for help to increase our faith. And then I love Jesus' words. What does he say to the dad? Bring him here to me. Don't bring him to the disciples. Don't bring him over yonder. Don't do this. Don't go there. Bring him to me. Bring him to me. And that's where all things in the end really belong, isn't it? That's where they belong, with the Lord. Every single circumstance, that's where it belongs. Give it to him. And before he knows what will happen next, he brings the child before him. And that's when we have those impossible things. I would most like to point out that this had been impossible. The disciples couldn't fix it. The dad's it's been like this his whole life. I'm sure they tried to get him whatever medical help was available. And then he says, no, bring him to me. And he says that to us this morning. What is your impossible? What is your thing that's never going to change, right? You're never going to change, never has changed, never will change. That thing. I want you to bring that thing right now in your head and say, I've done all I can thing, right? How about that one? I've done all I can thing. It's still not changing. Those are the toughest ones, the fiercest demons to fight, and the ones we ask Jesus to handle on our behalf through prayer. And instead of trying to fix the problem, we or give up or become angry that it's not changing, bring him to Christ, bring her to Christ, bring the situation to Christ, the one who is more than enough. Now you're putting it in the right place. I'm putting it in the right place. I'm going to say, I've done it all. Yep, you did it all. Now bring it to me. Do that. That's living by faith because he is enough. Let's keep going. 18 to 21. We're going to go back to Matthew 17. We're going to 18 to 21. And Jesus rebuked the demon. It came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. And the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, we couldn't cast it out. Why? Why couldn't we cast it out? So Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. For assuredly, I say to you, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind of thing does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Okay. So why couldn't they cast it out? Unbelief, right? The very thing we've been talking about. And here we see a key element revealed to us that goes in hand with our prayer life from time to time. I'm not saying it happens every day, but it happens from time to time. And it is, we must have faith. That's the first piece of it. We must have faith. And it doesn't have to be giant faith. It could be itty bitty, teeny tiny, weeny whiny, tiny little faith. Mustard size. Jesus is like, look, I'm not expecting great things out of you. It's okay. Just an itty bitty tiny thing. That's all I need. But then I want you to not only have faith, I want you to pray in accordance with my will, and the mountains will move. Okay, now, Jesus wasn't talking about moving actual physical mountains, right? We're not taking, I don't know, pick a mountain range you like, someplace in Colorado, and moving it to another, you're going to move it to New Jersey, right? That's not what he's talking about. He isn't talking about that. He's using it as a figure of speech. Jesus didn't even do that when he was on earth. He didn't move mountain ranges while he was on earth, okay? It's a figure of speech which represents overcoming difficulty. But it has been my experience that even when I have asked God to move a mountain, a difficult thing, and it still doesn't move, I say to myself, did I lack faith? No, not usually. Usually in that situation, it's not that I don't have enough itty-bitty amount of faith. What it usually is God is looking to do something else in the circumstances. It's either not his will or not his timing, one or the other, typically. And we have to remember very carefully, let's not fall into that name it, claim it kind of thing. You be the genie in the bottle, Lord. I'll rub the bottle. You do what I want. That's not how it works. He's God. We're not. We must pray and ask in accordance with his will. I have found when difficulty does, and the difficulty will not move, God is often changing me rather than the circumstance. He's like, nope, that mountain's staying. Nope, we're not removing that right now. You, however, are going to change. And those are hard, because I'd rather have the mountain move, frankly. I don't really want to get rubbed more into the conformity of Christ. I just want you to move my troubles out of the way, right? So when things look impossible, as was the case with the demon-possessed man, Jesus tells the disciples that they need to add something to the faith, and that prayer is coupled with fasting. So there's two pieces to this puzzle. It's not only have a little bit of faith, itty-bitty amount of faith, you now need to pray, and you need to couple that occasionally with fasting. Now, fasting, for if you're new in your faith and you're not familiar with that, fasting is typically something that we do when you don't eat, or maybe you don't eat and drink for a little period of time, or a couple of days, or whatever. And that is so that you can spend and put your focus back on the Lord. You can abstain from eating and the preparations of all of that in order to spend time alone with the Lord and draw closer to him spiritually. But for some people, withholding food is not possible due to dietary needs or restrictions. So if you said, I really can't do that, I feel lightheaded, I feel ill, or whatever, take something else that takes a large quantity of your time, whatever that looks like, right? If that is exercise, TV, internet, I don't know, whatever, abstain from it for a period of time. Take that extra time and use it for solitude with the Lord. And I want to say something else. When things look impossible, as was the case with the demon-possessed man, Jesus tells the disciples that they need to add something beside their faith which is, of course, fasting. But is it possible that when you can't get something to move, if it's indeed God's will for it to move, and it's not moving, and Jesus is telling them here that that thing was impossible, is it that, and I'm just throwing this out there, is it that some things need fasting because there is more demonic activity attached to that thing? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll give you an example. You can pray for people who are already saved for God to do X, Y, Z. And then you can pray for people who don't know the Lord for X, Y, Z. It seems like it takes more work to pray for the person who doesn't know the Lord. And I wonder, I'm not saying I can't give you a verse for this. I'm just wondering, is it because there's more, the spirit realm has infiltrated to the point where there's now needed prayer and fasting? Because remember, this child was demon possessed. Okay, I'm just throwing it out there. Do what you want with it. So if you've got something that's not moving, and salvation is one of those things I think we can always pray as God and know that that's God's will. So if you're praying for somebody's salvation and they don't know the Lord, perhaps try prayer and fasting. Faith, prayer, and fasting. Because again, this was a situation where this child was demon possessed. Take it for whatever it's worth. All right, so we see a progression occurring. First, we know that we set our eyes on Jesus. Next, we ask God to help our unbelief and increase our faith in him. And then we bring the situation to him through prayer and fasting. The chart on your handout gives you the progression. You see that? And that is because Jesus is enough. Why? Because he can do the impossible. He can do the impossible. Let's go on now to Matthew 22 and 23. Now, while they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And on the third day, he will be raised up." And they were exceedingly sorrowful. Jesus keeps giving his disciples glimpses into the future, and yet they seem unable to comprehend what he's going to accomplish. They're exceedingly sorrowful. And he keeps telling them he's going to overcome the grave and resurrect himself. And yet we read they're exceedingly sorrowful. If they asked any questions to clarify what was going to take place, it's not recorded for us. But I believe these disciples didn't fully comprehend the scope of what Jesus was there to do until Acts. I really believe when they got filled with the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, they began to get it. All of the pieces they're all clicking, and they're on, now we get it, right? But they also had the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, right? Prior to that, they didn't have it. So I think that's when it fully became clearer to them. When we live a life by faith, though, we should be ready for Jesus to do the impossible on our behalf, especially when we consider he is the one and only who has conquered death. If he can do that, we certainly can trust him for the events in our life. Nothing is too difficult nor impossible for him. And that's also on your handout. Don't be surprised when Jesus' promises are fulfilled. Why can we trust Jesus? Because he's enough, because he's incorruptible. That's another one of his attributes. He's incorruptible. All right, let's go on. We're going to wrap up the text here, 17:24 through the end of the chapter. And when they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him. I love this. Anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers?" And Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, take the fish that comes up first. And when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you." I love that this chapter ends out with this remarkable story that is the perfect example of what it looks like to walk by faith, right? Here we are. We can only assume that neither Peter nor Jesus had the coin at the time. Not that Jesus couldn't have just manufactured the coin, but Jesus instead takes this opportunity to make it a learning experience for Peter. So he says to him, first, Peter, let's talk about sonship. Let's just dive into that first before I get the coin for you. Here's the deal. Do the king's sons have to pay? No. Okay, well, neither do I. I'm free. And really, in the end, so is Peter. But he's free. But he says, nevertheless, we don't want to offend them. I'm going to help you go get the tax money. So he says to him, and I appreciate Spurgeon and Guzik had two great comments, and they're on your handout. Spurgeon says this, Thus, the great son pays the tax levied for his father's house. Think of that. But he exercises his royal prerogative in the act and takes a shekel out of the royal treasury. As a man, he pays, but first as God, he causes the fish to bring him the shekel in its mouth. And then David Guzik goes on to say, yet, and I love this one, and yet he did pay for Peter as a foreshadowing of the work of redemption for all men. Jesus, who didn't owe the price, but paid it nevertheless. At the same time, with that same price, he paid for Peter as well. Isn't that powerful? Jesus tells Peter, listen, go down to the lake now, and I'm going to tell you to go do something really unusual. Typically, Peter fished with what? Nets. I'm going to have you throw out a single line, Peter. You're just going to pitch in a line with a hook. And the first catch that you have is going to have a coin. That fish is going to have a coin in its mouth. Maybe it looks something like this. I love this picture. I was like, I always expected the fish to be bigger, but whatever. He swallows, it's a big coin for a little fish. But anyway, he swallows this, he opens up the mouth, and there it is. I had to Google this. What are the odds? I just want to know the odds. What are the odds that that's going to happen? Well, somebody somewhere did the math that I was shocked. Guy has clearly too much time on his hands. He must be a mathematician. But anyway, he said basically that the odds of this happening, if the sea were literally wall-to-wall fish, which of course we know that wasn't the case, but if it was wall-to-wall fish, and he threw a line in, and the odds of catching one fish that had one coin exactly the right amount is 1 in 15 billion. 1 in 15 billion, that's what just happened. And I love the fact that sometimes Jesus says, I want you to trust me by walking out your faith in a way, one, that totally defies all the odds. That's the first thing I want you to do. And then I want you to go do it in a way that you don't normally do it. Not your ordinary way. Your ordinary way would go down and get a net. I want you to throw a line in. I want you to do something completely different. And maybe he does that because he desires that we rely upon him, not ourselves or what we know how to do. Allow him to prove his power. Our job is to comply. And if we do the things that he is asking of us, he will use the circumstances to grow our faith. So that's kind of captured for you on that last chart. And we see a progression. Eyes on Jesus. Have faith. Bring the difficulty to Jesus with prayer and fasting. Don't be surprised when he fulfills his promises, and allow our actions to demonstrate our trust. Because Jesus is always enough, and his ways are incalculable. So as we get ready to close, Marie shared with us from Matthew 16 not too long ago. She said, the root of amazing faith begins with a seed planted deep into the good soil of a heart willing to receive it. That's what she said just last week. And as I thought on that, and I considered that for a while, and then I coupled that with the idea of what I shared with you from Dr. Bill Bright, something came to me. I'm a very, you know this by now, I'm a very visual person. Everything for me is pictures and visuals and applications. It's just how my brain has been wired. So I started to think about this and chew on it, and I was like, put a stake in it. Put a stake in it. And it came to me, I was like, okay, so you're asking me, Lord, to make a tangible declaration to you that I'm going to start living by faith, really live by faith. So this idea of a plant, first I thought stake like in the ground, like a big wooden stake, like you're going to build a fence. And then I thought, that's a little dramatic. And so then I was like, okay, so let's go with, something smaller that everybody could use. So I don't do well with plants. Every plant in my house is artificial. And that doesn't really work for this analogy because it's living by faith, not dead by faith. Okay, so that doesn't really work. So I had to go buy a plant, which I sadly will kill, but until it dies, it'll be a good reminder. So here's my deal. We have to decide that we're going to live by faith because Jesus is enough. And I don't want to live like my dog. I love my dog, but I don't want to live like that. So I have to make a choice. I have to say to myself, I am going to live by faith. So I'm going to stake this in this plant, hopefully that will live. And I'm going to say, I did this last week, so I've been reminding myself a lot. It's in my office. remind myself, I'm making a decision. I'm making a cognitive decision. I am going to live by faith, even when I don't understand, even when my circumstances tell me otherwise, even when it looks impossible. I am going to say to myself, I am putting this thing in here as a reminder that I want to look like this before the Lord. I want to please you with my life. I want to hear well done someday. And that means I got to do this. I can't keep telling people about it and not do it myself, right? Now, this is the tendency. I'll put it in here today. I'm like, yes, today, going to live by faith. And tomorrow, circumstances are going to be really dicey. And I'm going to be like, I don't really live by faith. You with me? Have you done that? Right. So we are to put it in and leave it there, right? And let it bloom, right? That's what we have to do. And it's hard. Even just this week, Stacy and I were saying, oh my gosh, the plans we keep making, and then they change, and then we have to keep saying to ourselves, we're going to walk by faith. We're going to take the next step, and we're going to say, today, we're going to do this. This is what we hear the Lord tell us. That's the step we're going to take, and we're going to walk by faith today. Today, in this moment, that's what we're going to do. We're going to walk by faith and live by faith. We're going to exercise our faith. We're going to do what we tell other people to do. That's what we're going to do. And so we're going to live by faith. That's our deal. I got to find my stick because it's not a good example if I don't have my stick in there. All right, so your job, your homework, is to find a plant. And if you only have an artificial one, it's okay. At least it'll look like it's living all the time. So that's your first job. A second thing, and you've probably heard me say this too, George Mueller is one of my all-time favorite biographies. Love the dude. Can't wait to meet him. So when I was preparing for this and thinking about faith, and I decided to reread his biography. And I told you about this night where I was laying in bed and I was stressing and thinking about this circumstance I really, really, really want to see change. And it's definitely God's will. And I'm like, and it's just a burning in my heart. And I was opening George Mueller's story. This is what I didn't get a chance to share with you. I opened up his biography. And when I looked at it, and I've read this biography so many times, I read this and it's like I'd never seen it before. He does something so powerful. He takes a book, any book, take a book at home. I don't care what it is. Pick a binder in your house. And on one side, he says, this is my prayer request, Lord, and this is the date. And on the other side, he left it blank. He was so expectant that God would answer his prayer request. He left the page blank so that he would have a place to write down the answer, because that's how expectant he was for God to move. I made a book. I got a lot of prayer requests on there right now, but many of them, and I'm being careful what I'm writing on there because I believe that just about everything that's on that pages are God's will. I'm really careful to just, it's not like I'm sitting there going, well, I'd really like a vacation in, I don't know, Tuscany, right? That's not one of the prayer requests. One of my prayer requests, I'll be honest with you, is that my children walk with the Lord. And I mean to tell you, that is my top prayer request, is that my children walk with the Lord, that they know him intimately, that they serve him with their lives, and that they demonstrate fruit out of that relationship. That's what's on that page. That's my number one. My number one. And I know that that's God's will. I know it because he desires that none should perish, that all should come to know him and walk with him. So I know my number one. There's going to be a day that thing is answered. I may not still be here on the earth when it's fully fulfilled, but I know that prayer request is his will for my kids' lives. Put a stake in the ground, girls. Put a stake in the ground. Make yourself a journal. Be expectant. He will not let you down. Bill Bright said it. When God says something, you can stake your life on it, and you can know he will not fail you. Let's close in prayer. Lord, this is a challenging one for me. It's been hard. I've waffled back and forth in camps of belief and unbelief, and how I wanted to, just like that father, I believe, but help my unbelief. I've been there. And I believe, God, that all of us on some level can identify with that. That father, he's so precious. You had compassion on him. You healed his son. Lord, you can do the impossible. You can demonstrate the inconceivable. You beat the odds. Nothing's impossible for you. Lord, help us to literally live like that. Our next thing that captures us by fear, we turn that around and say, I'm going to live by faith. I am not going to let this thing eat me alive or consume me. I will make a journal. I will write it down, and I will be expectant of the day that you answer it. And I will trust you in the meantime, one day, 1 hour, 1 minute, if that's what it comes to, at a time. Lord, you want us to live that abundant life with our head out the window, letting the air blow in our faces, enjoying the ride. Help us, God, I pray. In your Son's name, amen.